Good afternoon. This is Caregivers in the Kitchen with AARP and Sanford University in Birmingham. This is a new series designed with caregivers in mind. However, these ideas are appropriate for anyone looking for easy to prepare, healthy recipes. And who isn't looking for something like that these days? I know I am. The chefs for these classes are two dietitians from Sanford University, and I'll let them introduce themselves and talk about themselves a little bit more in just a minute. Clara Darling will be preparing the food, and Mim Gaines will be on hand to also help and answer any questions and provide instructions. We want to encourage you to ask questions, whether it's about the food here or other questions that you might have as a caregiver preparing food. To ask questions, the best thing to do is to put them in the chat, and then we can either call on you later or ask the question for you at that point. Please, if I hope that my dog's in the background. We are working from home, so I hope that they don't bother you. We're trying to keep them far away. So Mim and Claire, welcome to this, and I'm just going to let you take it from here. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing today.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Anne. Yes, as you mentioned, I'm Clara Darling. This is Mim Gaines. We are both dietitians here at Sanford University, and we're so glad that you all could join us today. So today we're going to be making a ham and lentil soup. It's basically a play off of the more traditional ham and bean soup, very fall, very holiday style soup. But we switched up a little bit just to add a little bit more nutrition to it, add a little bit, just a twist to the normal one. So we'll walk you through that. And as Anne said, please feel free to ask any questions as we go. We love questions. As dietitians, we love to talk about food and nutrition. So anything that comes to your mind, just shoot. We're going to start today by a very basic cut. We're just going to dice an onion to get some nice tangy flavors into our soup base. So you'll notice I started off with cutting my onion in half from root to tip, and I just took out the papery outside layer there. And one important thing when I'm dicing an onion, you actually want to keep the root as intact as possible when you go to dice it, and I'm going to show you why. So when I go to cut, first off, I want to mention a couple things about a cutting station that's really important. So I have a really heavy cutting board here, so it's not going to slide around, but most cutting boards at home are going to be a little smaller, and you're typically on a smooth surface. So it's always a good idea to have something nonstick underneath your cutting board. That can be something as simple as a damp paper towel or a damp towel that you've wrung out and put underneath it to keep it from sliding around. And then next, I want to make sure that you're holding your knife right. So I always like to give a little instruction. The best way to hold a knife is to take your thumb and forefinger and actually pinch this piece of metal right in front of the handle. It seems counterintuitive. A lot of people naturally want to hold to the back of the knife or hold up here and have their finger on top. But you're actually going to get the most control by pinching right here. You're going to be able to use all the force from your shoulder down straight into this knife. It's going to give you the best control over your knife and over your cutting. So now that I've got my station all set up and ready to go, when I go to dice into my knife, it's got these natural lines all the way down it. So I'm just going to follow those lines and use that as a guide. I'm doing a medium dice. So you'll see that's about maybe a ½ inch or so that you would cut into it. And you'll notice that I slice my knife in and I don't go quite to the root. And I am slicing, I'm not chopping straight down. The way knives are designed, they actually need that little bit of friction with the slice that's going to help smooth the cutting over. If you try to chop it down, you're going to get all those onion juices in your eyes, and it's going to make you cry a lot quicker. So I'm slicing down, keeping that root end intact, following it all around. So the reason I did that is now this is still intact, even though it's sliced, and I can just turn the whole thing sideways and do the same cut again, going the other direction. And because onions have those natural layers, this is just going to break up into a perfect little dice all on its own. So nice and simple. So
Clara, while you're chopping that onion, the onion does have a lot of nutrition value to it.
Absolutely.
It is white, and a lot of people have said, oh, don't eat white food. That's not at all what we're talking about. We want you to eat onions, white, yellow, red. And in fact, if you didn't have a white onion, could you use a different color onion?
Yes, absolutely. So Min was asking if I could use a different kind of onion with this, and that is definitely something we can do. So The main reason I use yellow onion in this particular soup is because of the color of it. So you could use red onion. It's just going to give it a little bit of a different color to it, but there's definitely other nutrients that you get from a purple or a red onion versus a yellow or a white, but it's really just your preference. Yellow onions tend to be a little bit milder. They have a little bit of sweetness, but a little bit of savoriness. So they're kind of a good catch-all onion. If you wanted more savory, more pungency, you could use a white onion. If you wanted something more sweet, you could use a red onion. And if you didn't like onions, you don't have to use them at all. It's definitely just a preference. So what I'm going to do here, I'll just go ahead and put my onions to the side for now. You'll notice, just as a personal preference, I try to not use my knife to pick up things when I can, because it does dull my knife quicker and then I have to sharpen it sooner. So I have what I call this a big scrape. People have different names for it. Some people call it a pastry cutter or a pastry knife, but I just keep that nearby so that when I'm cutting, I can use it to transfer things to a bowl. All right, so I've got my knife diced. The first two ingredients we're going to add to our pot are going to be our diced onions and then also our ham. So I bought a ham from the store. You can use any ham. I like to get a large chunk of it, so not the thin sliced stuff, though that will work fine. I just like to have a little bit heartier chunks in mine. But this soup is meant to be utilized mostly for leftover holiday ingredients. So I base it off of what my mom always has left over after Thanksgiving or Christmas. There's always some bits of ham or turkey. We always have carrot, celery, onion, because she definitely made 18 pans of dressing at some point. So we have that. We always have potatoes. So all of these ingredients are really things that my family typically has on hand. And so it's great for leftover, 2 days after Thanksgiving, you're tired of cooking, you don't want to cook anymore. This is just a nice, helpful thing that you can use your ingredients for and make a simple dinner. So for this, you'll notice on this one, it actually does have a little ham hock left in it. So I'm going to cut that out. And this has great flavor in it. So you could throw this right in your stew. Just like if you had an actual ham left over from Thanksgiving, you probably have the ham bone. That's a great way to flavor your soup. You can just take that whole ham bone and throw it in there and dice up any pieces to give you some actual ham chunks. But with what I got from the store, we'll just work with what I've got. So I'm going to come through and do similar to what I do with my onion, just make slices and then turn those into dices. And you can use any meat here. It doesn't have to be ham. I know that's just a classic one, and it's one that a lot of what am I trying to say? Like my parents and grandparents always preferred ham, but you could use turkey or really any meat, or you could make this a vegetarian dish very easily. You just use water or vegetable stock instead of chicken stock, and just leave out the ham, and it makes a really great vegetarian lentil soup. So it's very versatile.
Claire, another nice thing about ham is giving you the flavor, but you're not using that much ham, so the sodium content of the soup won't be that high.
That's right. That's right. So we like to make sure that we're keeping our sodium content in check, because obviously salt's great and it's delicious, but for our overall cardiovascular heart health, we want to make sure that we're keeping it under control. So ham is so flavorful in and of itself that it doesn't take much. Just a little bit goes a long way to give it that hearty feel to your soup, without having to put a whole lot in there.
And actually by using the turkey leftovers, as you suggested, then it would also lower that sodium content.
Yes, exactly. Because typically ham is cured, so it's got a little more sodium, or quite a bit more sodium actually, than a lot of your other natural meats, such as turkey.
The other thing I was noticing is that you're chopping it in small pieces. As someone who's working with a person that might be older, sometimes chewing is a problem. So the smaller piece of ham is noticeable.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the things we kept in mind when designing this recipe. And you can even cut smaller than this. I consider this a pretty small dice, but you can even cut smaller than this, or even put it, if you're really concerned about somebody being able to chew, you can put it in a food processor or blender and just blend it up into smaller pieces. Because this is really the only thing that's going to not break down as easily. But everything else that we have, so the onions, the carrots, the celery, we're going to cut everything pretty small. And the reason that we chose lentils over beans in particular is because these will break down very easily and be easy to swallow and digest. So anyone who has trouble chewing or swallowing is going to have a lot easier time consuming the soup with lentils than if it had large pieces of beans in it,
Well, the other nice thing about lentils, they are in that same family of the striped peas and beans, but you don't have the overnight soaking required.
Exactly. So, if you forget to soak beans, you're kind of out of luck. You didn't plan ahead. Maybe now you have to quick soak them. You don't have to worry about any of that with lentils. You get the same benefits off of them, but they're going to cook in 20 to 25 minutes without any hassle, no soaking, none of that. And so I'm going to go ahead and just turn turn my stove on back here, just to about a medium low, and start to warm up my pan. I don't want to get it too hot, but I don't want to put in any food while it's warm. I want to be able to hear a small sizzle when I go to put my food in there. So while that's warming up, I will start to cut my carrots. So for this, again, you can cut it as large or small as you want. If you like a chunkier soup, you can definitely just rough chop this. If you are wanting smaller pieces or concerned about someone who, maybe has problems chewing or swallowing, you can do smaller. So the way I like to cut carrots, I'll start off by cutting off a panel, whatever size dice I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a small dice on this. So I've cut a panel off, and then I have this flat side. So when I'm cutting, I always want to make sure to get a flat surface on the cutting board as quick as possible. It's going to help give me more stability, more security, and there's less chances of me accidentally slipping and cutting myself. So as soon as I have a flat side, I put it down. Now I'm nice and sturdy, and I'm going to do that same size cut down the carrot. And if you're not comfortable cutting the whole carrot at first, it's super easy just to cut it in half. And then you have less to work with, and you can do that same cut. So taking one side off, putting that flat side down, and then just going down the carrot. And this is another one. If you are short on time, don't want to cut it, whatever it is, you can put all of these, rough chop them and put them into a food processor and cut them into really small pieces very quickly. My grandmother used to do that when she was saving time, and she loved it. All right, so I'll do this last one, and then continue with the dice. So now I have these panels. I'm going to go through each one of them, and I'm trying to make a square. So depending on how big they are, most of these are fairly small. So I can cut that one into 2, and I might cut this one into 3. I'm just wanting to get generally the same size on all of these so that they're going to cook the same. So now that I have all these carrot sticks, you just turn them again, do the exact same cut the other way, go down, and that's going to give you these nice squares, medium dice. It doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of these soups are meant to be rustic. So as long as they're generally the same size, so they'll cook about the same time, that's really all that matters. But this is a great way to practice your knife skills at home.
Nutritionally, the carrots are just packed full of vitamin A, and vitamin A is one of those nutrients that actually our older population often lacks. So it's a great fat soluble, meaning it doesn't come out in the liquids. And it's just a very healthy choice. Yeah,
it's a great way to get that vitamin A, help with that eyesight as we get older. The night blindness can often be an issue as we get older, so helping maintain that eyesight and keep it healthy. All right, so my pot's nice and warm over here. So I've got my olive oil. I've just got a tablespoon of olive oil here. We like to use extra virgin olive oil for a few reasons. It does have some health benefits when kept raw. But it also helps to give a little extra flavor into it. It's got some really great unsaturated fats in it, some monounsaturated fats. You can really use any cooking oil that you want, though. We do prefer oil to butter typically because we prefer unsaturated fat versus saturated fat. It's going to help more with your overall heart health, your immunity, and just try to limit those calories that we get from excess saturated fat. So I'm just going to add this right into my pot. I'll give it just a few seconds. Make sure it coats the bottom of my pot. I see that it's moving. It starts to move quickly, kind of like water. It goes from an oil consistency to a water consistency, so I know that it's nice and warm. And then I will add my onions and my ham right in there. So I don't know if you can hear it, but it's got just a light sizzle. I don't want my oil to smoke. Just want it warm enough to start the cooking process off. So I'm going to let those cook for about a minute or 2. We just want to get a little bit of color on the ham and on the onions, get a little bit of that fat from the ham rendered off while it's cooking, and then we'll go on to our next step. So while that's cooking, I'll continue with my knife cuts here. I'm just going to keep doing these carrots, get them out of the way. And you'll notice as I'm cutting, I do what's called a claw with my left hand, and that's what we like to call it. So I'm always making sure I keep my fingers out of the way. If you try to cut like this, it won't take much for your knife to slip and cut you. If someone walks behind and bumps you, you got kids running around. So being able to keep your fingers tucked, if something happens and you get hit or something slips, the most you're going to do is maybe nick a piece of your knuckle, but you're not going to take off any appendages, which is always ideal. No one needs to lose a finger after Thanksgiving.
The other great thing about these vegetables that you picked when you made this recipe is that they all give us a bit of fiber.
Oh, yes.
And fiber is so important at any age.
That is true. And a lot of times, I'll talk about that with part in our role, in our moods, our mental health, our physical health, everything. So we want to make sure to get fiber where we can. So all these vegetables are going to help give us both soluble and insoluble fiber. So I've got my carrots done. I'm going to grab a bowl to put them in. So again, just going to put these to the side, and then once my onions and ham get done, this will be our next things to go in. So just like the carrots, I'm going to cut the celery next and do the exact same cut. So to make it easier, I can cut it in half, and celery kind of has that weird U shape to it. So I'll turn my knife and just go maybe 4 times over it. Again, doesn't have to be perfect, just a rustic look. I want it about the same size as my carrots. And stack those up and just dice them down, keeping my fingers out of the way.
Of course, celery gives you a lot of fiber while we're still thinking about fiber. And this kind of fiber actually can help with blood sugar.
Yes.
Clean your blood sugar. So if a person is a type 2 diabetic, or even a person that has diabetes type 1, this type of fiber is a great way to help cool that blood sugar down.
Correct. Yeah, so there's 2 kinds of fiber, soluble and insoluble. They're both really great, so we don't really worry about which one we're getting as long as we're getting fiber. But our insoluble will help go into our bloodstreams and kind of help bind to some excess cholesterol that we've got floating around. It will also slow down our digestion so that our body has time to absorb the sugars over a period of time rather than spiking our blood sugar. So if you are diabetic or know someone who is, you know how important it is to keep that blood sugar from spiking too high too quick. And so fiber is a really great way to keep that under control. All right, I've got my carrots and celery diced. I'm just going to come back here and give my onions and ham a stir. So they're cooking down. They're still pretty juicy. Some of that fat's rendering off. I don't see any browning yet, so I'm going to let that go another minute. And then the last thing, not the last thing, we have 2 more things to cut. So let's see. I will go ahead and do the garlic. So it's only 1 clove of garlic. You can always use more or less depending on how you like it. But the trick with garlic, it does have a lot of natural oils in it, and the oils make it really sticky and hard to get that skin off of it. So the easy trick to make it come off easily is I'll use my knife to actually press down on it using the heel of my hand, keeping my fingers out of the way. I just press down until I hear it crack. And now because of that, because I've crushed it, this paper will just fall right off, and you can just get rid of the paper, and all you have left is your beautiful garlic. And for this recipe, we're going to mince our garlic. And the way I like to mince it, you can just sit here and rock your knife back and forth, but I really like to release those oils first. You're going to get a little bit more flavor out of it when you do that. So again, I'll do the exact same thing I just did, but I'm going to crush it a little more this time. And if you can see on my knife, I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but there's all this beautiful oil that was just released from crushing it. And if you just cut with the blade of the knife, you're not going to release all those oils. You're not going to get quite as much flavor. So I like to do that first. And now it's half cut for me. I just have to go through and give it a couple rounds of chopping just to get it into smaller pieces.
And now, Clara, this is what the whole garlic clove looks
like. Yeah, so
this
that's what we call it. Yeah, we call that a garlic bulb. And then it has all these individual, what we call cloves in it. So you can just break off these cloves. They're different sizes, so sometimes you may get a really small one. You might need to use 2 or 3 of those to equal 1 large one. But that's all it is. And has a lot of good nutritional benefits as well. Helps with our immune system.
And if for some reason you didn't have the garlic clove at home, you can always use the
Absolutely.
Spice rack garlic.
Yeah,
right?
so dried spices are a great substitute just to have at home in case you forgot to get something or didn't have time to stop. You can always use dried versions of these flavorings. So dried garlic, dried onion, dried herbs and spices rather than, fresh herbs. It's always an option. to give it a little flavor. There is a trick though, if you're going to use something dried, you typically want to use about a third of what you would have used fresh, especially with herbs, because they're concentrated. You get all that water out of it, the flavor's so much stronger. So you want to make sure that you're, using the right amount. You're not overpowering it.
And I want to also point out, this is garlic powder, not garlic salt.
Correct. So
Because if you were using the salt, that would really increase that sodium, and it would not be as healthy that way. So using your powder is a better choice for this.
yes, absolutely. And so I'm about to move on to the next step. So I'll just pull this over and maybe you can see it on the camera. I know it's hard to see in my pot, but I'm starting to get just a little bit of brown in there. My onions are getting translucent. That's kind of the universal sign that it's ready for the next step. You'll see that a lot in recipes. So the onions go from white and opaque to kind of a translucent look. They're very fragrant. All the fats rendered off that ham. So the second part of our recipe says add celery and carrots and garlic. Cook for 1 more minute just until garlic is fragrant. So I like to point that out because a lot of times recipes will say this. And I've had people ask me, what does that even mean, that garlic's fragrant? And literally what it means is that you can smell it. So it'll start to release its flavor, and you don't want to burn garlic. You don't want to overcook it because it will get a bitterness when you start to burn it. So you literally add it in, and within a minute, you'll start to smell garlic. It'll start to become very fragrant. And that's how you know it's time to go on to the next recipe. It's just that simple. So I'm going to mix it in. That cooks for a minute. So you're not fully cooking your carrots and your celery here. Those will continue to soften and cook once we add our broth and our water and cook down that way. And they'll start to infuse their flavors into the broth as well. So while that's cooking, we'll make sure that we have all of our next ingredients here. So for our liquid, which we like, one of the great things about this recipe is we have all this great liquid in it. So you're going to get a lot of hydration, a lot of water. And as we know, water is really important to our overall health, making sure that our cells and our organs stay nice and hydrated. It helps our body functions. It helps our skin health, our hair health, again, our overall mood. So it's really helpful. So we use a combination of 2 different liquids here. I'm going to use just some straight water, 2 cups of that. Then I'm also going to use 4 cups of chicken stock. So we're lucky here on campus. Our culinary students make some wonderful chicken stock in the labs here. So we always have access to great fresh stock. But there you can get a lot of different varieties of stocks or broths or bone broths. They'll be called different things. They're really all the same thing, but in the store, they could be called any of those. We like to recommend that you get low sodium chicken broth. If you look at the label on just standard chicken broth that doesn't say low sodium, it will have an exorbitant amount of sodium in it. And you won't even realize that it's in there. The benefit of having our fresh made stock is that we don't have any. But if you're buying at the store, you definitely want to get that low sodium just, again, to help keep that under control. And if you prefer a different flavor stock, again, if you prefer vegetable stock or beef stock, anything will work in here. We just have chicken stock on hand, and I think, chicken, poultry gives that nice fall flavor in the air. Yeah.
The other thing is that sometimes people would get chicken bouillon in those little cubes instead of the stock. So if you happen to have the chicken bouillon cube, of course, it's going to be packed with sodium, but could you water it down?
Absolutely. Flavor-wise, it will do the exact same thing. The only concern is the sodium. So definitely keep an eye on that. But otherwise, it does the same thing. It's got that flavoring in it. Again, it's something easy that you already have in your home. So it's great to go. So we've got our water and our broth. The other flavorings we're going to use. So I have a bay leaf here, and really all you need is one. Bay leaves help give like a floral just depth to anything you add it to. So we usually add it to soups and stocks. It just gives a little extra oomph to it. And then for spices, we just have salt, black pepper, and smoked paprika. So I put as optional for smoked paprika. Some people may not like it, but it's one of my favorite spices. So paprika is pretty common. And if you don't have smoked paprika, you could just use plain paprika. The reason I like the smoked is it gives that extra like smoky flavor. It kind of gives the warmth of the fall with it. And I just love that little light smokiness. It's not overpowering. It's very subtle. And it helps give a nice little red tinge to your soup as well. Give it some nice color. So we've got our spices and our bay leaf. And then we also have some fresh herbs that we cut out of our garden this morning. So one of my favorite herbs to use this time of year is rosemary. Rosemary grows great through the winter. It's very hardy. It takes well to the temperature. So it's one that I can use year round. And again, it gives it just that really warm flavor. Feels very savory. And then with that, we're going to use some thyme as well. both of these are commonly used in chicken soup and chicken and dumplings and all those nice chicken brothy dishes that we love so much.
Clara mentioned that she went out this morning to our Sanford patio and she picked the fresh herbs. Herbs are quite easy growing on your back porch.
They are.
Use little container pots. At your house, do you start it with the seed or do you just go get the plant and transplant it?
I've done both. Some of them I'm more successful. I'm able to grow from seeds, and then some of them I really struggle with. So I'll go get a plant, or I've had friends or my mom will take me a clipping from her. So I've done it all. It just depends on if I'm able to grow it here. Some ones are easier than others, but either works great. And yeah, they grow so well just right outside your window. And unfortunately, they tend to be expensive in stores,
Right.
Because they're highly perishable and they don't sell that well. And so you'll pay a lot of money for one little box. But growing, these grow like weeds outside of my home. And so it's so easy just to go out and take a clipping. But if you don't have them, then absolutely, you can also always use a dried version. Yeah, so especially during the winter when herbs tend to die off. Like I said, my rosemary is pretty sturdy. It can grow, but most of the other herbs are going to die off this time of year unless I'm lucky enough to be able to grow them inside. But that's why it's nice to have dried herbs on the shelf ready to go. You have to cook a little bit differently with them. If you're going to use a dried herb, you typically want to add it in the beginning of the cooking process, whereas a lot of more delicate herbs, especially like your basil and oregano, those you would add at the end if they're fresh. So don't overcook them. But once they're dried, you need to be able to release those flavors. So you have to rehydrate them. So you'd want to add them early on in the cooking process, but they're great substitutes. And again, you would want to use about a third dried of what you'd want to use fresh.
The neat thing about herbs and spices that I like is that if you think back to olden days, our pharmacists from olden days would actually use the herbs and spices as part of as medicine. So just saying that these could be a type of pro-health, we really encourage you to use more herbs and spices to replace other, like the salt that you use, because like I said, these are very packed full of nutrients, phytochemicals, and just overall great health. Even good for the immune system.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've got that in there. And then with this step, you are supposed to add the potatoes in. So I'm going to go ahead and dice those up real quick. We want to make sure that they have plenty of time to get nice and tender. So we're going to get them about halfway cooked before we add our lentils, because our lentils are going to cook even faster. So again, for dicing these potatoes, you can go as big or small as you want. It's completely up to you. I'm going to go kind of small just for time's sake so that we can try to get this cooked in the half-hour time we've got on here. So when I'm going to cut things, I like to do all one cut at a time. It makes it more efficient. So I'm going through, I'm slicing each one of these, doing one cut, moving them to the side, and then I'll come back and cut all of them with the next cut. When you have to cut a lot of these, if you're working in a restaurant or whatever, you'll have to cut, 20 pounds or so of these at a time. You start to catch on little tricks that'll help you move a little faster. All right, so I've got them all cut into these panels, and just like my carrots and celery, I'm going to come back through, cut these into little sticks, and then turn those sticks sideways, keeping them all stacked up. And that's going to give me these nice little dices. So I am keeping the skin on. These are Yukon Gold potatoes. They're a type of waxy potato, so a little bit different than like our standard Idaho russet potatoes most people use. Both of them are perfectly fine. I just like these because the skin's a little more tender and there's a lot of great nutrients in that skin. We can get a lot of good potassium from these, which will help with our overall heart health. Again, our hydration, it's an important electrolyte, very similar to sodium. So keeping that skin in there just gives some extra fiber, some extra nutrients. I just like them. I like the texture of waxy potatoes a lot.
As you're cutting those potatoes, you've already put this other spices in, but you also did have a little bit of salt in your
Correct.
recipe.
Yes, I had 1 teaspoon of salt in there. And
you used a kosher salt.
Correct.
So no name brand, any kosher salt. But tell us about the size, the kosher salt versus the regular.
Yes, the kosher versus iodized arguments. This is a constant discussion, especially among chefs and restaurateurs. So most chefs will use some version of kosher salt, and kosher has a larger grain, so I can physically pick it up and I can feel those grains in between my fingers. So when I'm going to season things as a chef, when I'm doing things to taste, it's so much easier for me. I can feel it in my fingers and I know what I'm doing. But nutritionally, we like to have iodized salt because it has a necessary nutrient, iodine, in it. So we love that iodine. So that's the constant argument. Do we do it for culinary sake or do we do it for nutrition's sake? So iodized salt has very small granules, and so it makes it more difficult to season by taste, by hand, but it's got that iodine in it, which is great for your overall health and metabolic health.
And actually, salt was iodized as public health prevention, because without the iodine, you would have border problems or other thyroid problems. Now, right now, we don't see a lot of thyroid problems related to a lack of iodine in America. And that's because about 88% of us always use this iodized salt. So as Clara said, the iodine, no matter what name brand it is, check to make sure that you're buying the iodine salt for your health benefits. You got those potatoes ready.
I did. And one other note on that salt I like to mention as far as measuring. So because of the different size of the flakes, you will actually get more salt per teaspoon of iodized than you will for kosher. So if you have iodized, I recommend using about 3/4 of a teaspoon rather than a full teaspoon, because you're actually going to get more salt out of it. All right, so I've got my potatoes all done. Pretty small slices, or pretty small dices, because I want them to cook up fairly quick. And I'm looking over here, I've got my broth. Oh, it's starting to smell so good. I can smell the garlic and the rosemary. So I'm just going to add this right in. And for time's sake, I'm actually going to put my lid on it. So when you put a lid on a pot, it adds a pressure. It pressurizes the contents of the pot and helps them cook just a little bit faster. So just for time's sake, you always want to keep an eye on it, make sure it's not exploding out of the pan. But we will let that go for a few minutes.
Talk to me about the fact that you're going to add yogurt
Yes.
to the meal,
So I added, again, as an optional thing, some fat-free Greek yogurt. So for a few reasons, the main one's going to be that extra protein. So a lot of times as we get older, we really have to watch our protein intake. We need that protein to make sure that not only our muscles stay strong, but that we keep our overall muscles from waning away. We need to make sure that we don't get weak, that we keep our body healthy, and we keep our weight maintained. So protein's a great way to do that. And Greek yogurt has a really very strong protein content. And if we get the non-fat, then we can still limit our excess fat intake that we could get from, if you had regular yogurt, it would actually still have that saturated fat in there. But additionally, it's also going to add a nice creaminess and a nice tanginess. Greek yogurt kind of has an acidity, like a tanginess to it, so it'll help give an extra background flavor to your soup. But if you don't like that, if you like a nice brothy soup, because sometimes that's, in the winter, that's all I want is a nice brothy soup. You just leave this out and you've got it. But when you add this in, I feel like it changes the whole context of the soup. It really does. It tastes like one thing. Both of them are good. They're just very different.
Usually we think about yogurt as being such a great calcium source as well. But your yogurt also is a great iodine source.
That's it.
So by using this, even though you're using the kosher salt with no iodine, your recipe actually will have some iodine because of that.
That's wonderful. So we're
still getting that balance. We're still getting all the different colors, and the colors representing all those different phytochemicals, all the different vitamins, and now we're getting the minerals as well.
That's just wonderful. Yeah, we get a lot of those minerals from these lentils as well. They have a really great source of, again, that protein, but also some minerals and phytonutrients. And you can get lentils of all different colors. So we're using red lentils. It's one of my favorite. They're very beautiful. They tend to cook the quickest because they are usually very small. You can see these are just tiny. But green lentils are really common here in America, and they're a little bit larger. So they may take like 5 more minutes to cook. But they're still really nice. They're a little bit heartier, but there's also yellow lentils, kind of like in a lentil dal, if you've ever had that. You can use that. You can use whatever kind of lentil you want, or any kind of bean, really.
And as we're winding down the show today, you're going to go ahead and put that in, and I'll get the table set. How does that sound?
That sounds lovely.
All right.
So take that out of the way. Yeah, so our last ingredients, we will add in the lentils and cook those until they are done. And then the potatoes are fork tender. So it's kind of a double stage that we're going to check for. You'll know the lentils are done. So I'll show you once they get there. But these are nice, solid colors right now. Once you add them in, they'll start to hydrate. And you'll actually see the hydration occur. They will start to get kind of translucent on the outside, but there will still be solid red dots in the center. And as it moves through, they'll start to dissolve. And so you'll see they'll all become translucent. So once that's done, you would also check your potatoes to make sure they're fork tender. So just, put a fork in them and make sure they can split open without a lot of force. And once you get to that point, we'll put in our peas and our yogurt and just warm it up. And that's all we'll have left. So we'll let Mim come set up our placemat here.
This is the fun part. We get to eat what you've been cooking.
Yes. So look at that placemat. That's just beautiful.
Trying to keep with the fall theme with,
Yeah, I like
the polished colors, because as we said in the very beginning, this is a great way to use common foods that we have in the house, as well as those leftover foods with holiday season coming up. So
Absolutely.
Don't wait till after Christmas to fix this soup. Go ahead and fix it now, right?
Absolutely. All right, and we actually have some soup done. So I'm going to go ahead and add my lentils in here and let those be cooking. But just to make sure we were able to show you the finished product, we actually have some that we started about an hour ago. So it's nice and ready. So as this is cooking, I'll bring this over and we can show you what the finished product is going to look like.
I'm sorry they're not in the audience with us right here to smell all these delicious flavors.
Oh, yes. So we'll put this in a clear bowl so you can kind of see what it's going to look like. But this is our finished soup here. So we've got all those nice colors, the orange, the green, the white, the ham bits in there. It smells so wonderful. And you can see just the light creaminess in it, the little bits of herbs floating around. I already feel just warm looking at it.
I feel like
So
I
while
can
you're
smell it
serving
here.
And are there any questions coming in?
We do have a few questions, a couple of
I'd love to hear
questions.
those.
We had one I had asked, but we have one from Tara who asked, do you lose any nutrients if you parboil potatoes before slicing?
So you will lose some water soluble vitamins that will get lost in the water. Or if you're doing that to make cutting it easier, I assume that's probably why you're doing it, then it might be worth that loss of nutrients. You're still going to have a lot of nutrients. So I like to say that a lot. There's certain things that we do. Maybe we could get a little bit more nutrients out of it if we didn't parboil them. But if it's between that and you not cooking it at all, I would rather you parboil them and cut them from there. And because there's still going to be a lot of potassium and fiber left in that. But yeah, you would lose a little bit.
What about if you just, instead of parboiling, you could just bake them for a little while?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. With the parboiling under the water, the nutrients are coming out in the water. So if you didn't use that water as part of the stock, then you would definitely be losing those nutrients.
Yes.
But to bake it, it would still be in
That's
that
completely
shell.
true. Yeah, because it's the water. A lot of these vitamins are water soluble. So when we cook them in water, they leach out. But if you it's not the cooking that denatures them. So if you just cook them in the oven, that's a great alternative as well.
Or using the water that you cooked the potatoes
Yes,
in.
absolutely. I mean, you are using 2 cups of water in this. You could parboil in that and then use that water back in the recipe. I've done that before when making like carrot soup, and I don't want to lose all that good vitamin A. That's a good question.
Any other questions, Diane?
Well, and then I had a question. You were talking about sharpening your knives and keeping them sharp, right? So that I know that that's a safety thing as well as an ease of cooking, ease of doing the preparation. How do you sharpen your knives, or how often? How do you know if you're really working with a dull? I mean, I can tell after a while. I go, wow, this is really dull. But I wonder how often I should be sharpening my knives and how I should do that.
And I wish I had my sharpener and my honer in here because I love to show the difference. So there's 2 versions of quote unquote sharpening that we use. So there's the sharpening that you do every so often, and that actually requires taking down the blade and shaving off just a minute amount of the metal from the blade and actually sharpening that edge. And so that takes off metal. You don't want to do that too often. I cut a lot, so I do maybe once a month, and I have a whetstone, so I take off very little. But what you want to do every time you go to cut is what's called honing. So a honer or a steel is that really long sword kind of thing that usually comes with your knife kit. A lot of people don't even know what it's there for other than beating their children, maybe. I'm just kidding. kidding. But
your spouse.
Yes. So you have the handle on it and it has a long, it's either flat or it's round coming out. And so that's used just to realign the blade. So as you're cutting, your blade will start to get wobbly. You can't really see it with the naked eye, but it just gets a little off kilter. So what that honer does is realign that blade. So it's not taking off the metal, you're just realigning it. And so it's a good idea to do that every time you go to cut. It's going to help maintain the sharpness of your knife for longer so that you don't have to sharpen it as much. But it is recommended that you do that every time you go to cut.
Okay. I don't know.
There's a lot of.
Go ahead, Clara. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say there's a lot of different sharpeners out there, but there's some really easy ones that are just handheld that don't require a lot of skill or practice to it, that you just run your knife through. So those are, you can get those for 10 or 15 bucks. So it's not a bad idea to invest in those as well.
Okay. Well, this looks like a wonderful meal that you could also freeze, because we were talking about the ease of it for either serving to others within your family or as a caregiver. We talked about, making meals easier for them. Talk a little bit about that, how this is a good kind of a dish that they can actually make ahead of time or and save and freeze, or your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely a good recipe for that. It will hold up really well to both. It'll last for, about 7 days in the refrigerator. So it's a great one to make ahead of time. You can also make it and freeze it. It will thaw and work just wonderful. And so it's got great nutrients in it, not just for the caregiver, but also for the person you're taking care of. It's really dual. That way you don't have to cook 2 meals. It's really flavorful. It's really delicious. It's got all those nutrients in it, but it's also easy to eat. So it's great for someone, again, who may have trouble eating or swallowing. But it's a great one to make ahead of time and just to keep on hand, especially if, you're tired one day and you just don't have a lot of energy to put into dinner. You can just pull it out of the freezer and thaw it out. Maybe serve it with a loaf of bread. You can spice it up.
And the nice thing is that the type of container that we use a lot of it for the freezing here at Sanford. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just your standard old, and it just has a top, so you can make it. You can use the smaller sizes if you want to do it for a single serving, and just pull out the one serving and pop it in the microwave, or you can do it in the bigger size. So if you want to serve it for the family, but just a steel top, put it in the freezer.
Yeah. I do like these. These are what most restaurants use. They're great. We call them deli containers in the restaurant world. But this is a 32-ounce or 1-quart container, so it's really convenient. And you get the half ones that are the pint containers, so 2 cups. So you know exactly how much you're getting. They fit really great into refrigerators. They stack. The lids fit really tight and secure, so if you dump it over, it's not going to spill out. They're pretty inexpensive. They're really sturdy. They're microwave safe. They're dishwasher safe. Yeah. So I highly recommend those. You can just order those online and get a big pack of them. They're my favorites.
And Tawana asked, can you add other vegetables?
Oh, yes. You can add anything you want to this. That's a great question. So what I would say is if you cut any root vegetables, add that with the potatoes. So you can add turnips, parsnips, rutabagas, whatever root vegetables you want, and add those with the potatoes because they're going to cook about the same. And then if you add any of your, what we call non-starchy vegetables, so your zucchinis or your squash, anything like that, you could add
green beans
at the end.
Right?
Yes, green beans.
I know at our house, Thanksgiving and Christmas both, we typically have leftover green beans because we don't make it into that casserole. This would be a great way just to use those leftover beans.
Yes, absolutely. You can just spice this up. This is a really versatile recipe. You can use any vegetables you want, any herbs or spices you want, any meat you want. I mean, really, you can just substitute.